red line, I'm going to cut off all weapons so they don't have the Iron Dome to protect them. They don't have. But there's red lines that if he crosses them, you cannot have 30,000 more Palestinians dead.
Joe Biden should not be shouting angrily at America. America should be shouting angrily at Joe Biden.
Our freedoms are literally on the ballot this November. Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans are trying to take our freedoms away.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Tensions are rising between President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over the war in Gaza. Over the weekend, the president said the country's approach to the conflict was, quote, hurting Israel more than helping. The prime minister rejected President Biden's criticism, telling Politico his military policies are supported by a majority of Israelis. Nancy Cordes joins us now from the White House. Nancy, always good to see you. What is the latest on President Biden's clash with Netanyahu?
An international tit for tat, Robert. The president saying over the weekend that an Israeli ground invasion into Rafah would constitute a red line for him because of the more than 1 million civilians, Palestinians who are hunkered down there, who have nothing to do with this conflict. But he didn't spell out exactly what would happen if his red line was crossed. In fact, he said in the very same interview that he would never cut off funding to Israel and he would never abandon Israel. So that left it unclear what crossing a red line of his might actually mean. And then Bibi Netanyahu himself spoke to reporters and made it clear he doesn't plan to abide by that red line. He said his red line is making sure that another October 7th attack by Hamas never happens again, and that he is going to press ahead with his plans to invade Rafah. So clearly a major difference of strategy and opinion playing out on the world stage with neither leader backing down.
In the wake of the State of the Union, President Biden certainly dealing with foreign policy, also dealing with domestic politics. Let's listen to the latest campaign ad, at least a snippet of it from the Biden campaign.
Look, I'm not a young guy. That's no secret. But here's the deal. I understand how to get things done for the American people. I led the country through the COVID crisis. Today, we have the strongest economy in the world. I passed a law that lowers prescription drug prices, caps insulin at $35 a month for seniors. For 4 years, Donald Trump tried to pass an infrastructure law, and he failed. I got it done. Now we're rebuilding America.
So, Nancy, that's the message. Where is the president going to see if that message can connect with voters?
He's going to a variety of battleground states, Robert. He was in Georgia over the weekend. He was in Pennsylvania on Friday. Today, he's in Manchester, New Hampshire. And speaking about his age, as you saw in that ad, in a more overt way than he has perhaps in the past. It's well known to him and to the campaign that this is a liability, that many Americans have concerns about reelecting an 81-year-old president. And so he's kind of tackling it head on, saying that with age comes experience, and listing what he was able to get done in his first term, in part because he has that experience. And at the end of the ad, in a lighter moment, they play an outtake where he basically jokes, hey, I'm a young guy. Why are we even doing this? So, this is a president who has often chosen to address this issue with humor. He's going to keep doing that. But clearly, he's also going to be addressing it in a more fulsome way, knowing that this is something that voters are concerned about.
Let's take a look at this map about President Biden's campaign stops. As you can see, if we can pull it up, he was in Georgia in recent days and also in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. You see the industrial Midwest, the Mid-Atlantic. These are all part of President Biden's campaign stops. What's also interesting, Nancy, is that while former President Trump has often been a different type of Republican in his messaging on long-term federal spending on issues like Medicare, President Biden is saying, wait a second, we're going to tie you to traditional Republican thinking on these issues, to the Paul Ryan wing. Let's listen to what President Biden had to say in his recent trip to New Hampshire.
But the bottom line is he's still at it. I'm never going to allow that to happen. I won't cut Social Security. I won't cut Medicare. Instead of cutting Medicare and give tax breaks to the wealthy, I will protect and strengthen Social Security and Medicare and make the wealthy begin to pay their fair share.
It's a battle of populism from the Democrats, populism from the Republicans on federal spending. What do you make of it, Nancy?
Well, former President Trump gave him an opening this morning when he did an interview, and he was asked about entitlements, Social Security and Medicare. And he said, yeah, there are lots of cuts you can make to those programs. That is the kind of thing that most politicians have steered away from saying in recent years because the public doesn't like it. But he said it, and then a few hours later, President Biden hammered him for it in New Hampshire.
Nancy Cordes at the White House. Thank you. Meanwhile, former President Trump said in an interview today he believes TikTok is a national security threat but does not support banning it. But a bill on Capitol Hill, which could lead to just that, is gaining momentum right now. Joining us is Nicole Killian from Capitol Hill, our congressional correspondent. Nicole, thanks for being here. So where does this stand? There's pressure from the right and the left to ban TikTok, but it's a little bit muddled inside the Republican Party about exactly how hard of a stance to take.
Yeah, well, despite the former president's stance, or his most recent stance that he made with respect to an interview earlier today, it's unlikely to affect the path forward for this bipartisan piece of legislation, which, to be clear, doesn't ban TikTok, but it does require that the Chinese company that owns TikTok, ByteDance, divest itself from TikTok within a period of a number of months by September of this year. Otherwise, the TikTok app could potentially be removed from app stores. So that is what this bill aims to do. House Majority Leader Steve Scalise said they plan to move forward with a vote on this bill as soon as this coming Wednesday. So whether or not those Republicans who have come out in support of this measure change their perspective in any way in light of the former president remains to be seen, but it's still widely expected that there could be enough votes to move this legislation forward in the House.
I know everyone who's watching this is a big streamer. Maybe you use social media, but they're also, we do still have television broadcasts. We know that you all love CBS, but there is another network, of course. They have a comedy show on Saturday night, and they lampooned Senator Katie Britt of Alabama for her response to President Biden's State of the Union address. Nicole, you've been tracking the cascading response to Senator Britt and her remarks. What is the latest on that front?
Well, there are a number of reporters here on Capitol Hill anxiously awaiting the opportunity to speak with Senator Britt to see if she will further clarify her position. Of course, we did hear from her over the weekend on Fox News Sunday, where she was asked about this anecdote that she gave during her State of the Union rebuttal, where she referenced this woman who had been sex trafficked when she was 12. But in telling that story, appeared to pin the blame on the Biden administration for her circumstance. She was asked to clarify that story. Take a listen to what she had to say.
We have to bring attention to it. We have to tell those stories, and the liberal media needs to pay attention to it because there are victims all the way coming to the border. There are victims at the border, and then there are victims all throughout our country. And to me, it is disgusting to try to silence the voice of telling the story of what it is like to be sex trafficked.
Now, she didn't explicitly state whether, again, or she intended to tie this woman's story to the Biden administration, but she did explain in that interview that she was very clear that this incident happened to this individual who is now a woman and an advocate for sex trafficking victims, that this occurred when she was a young girl, when she was 12, seeming to suggest that it did not, in fact, happen on the president's watch. But that being said, there has still been a lot of fallout from the speech, not only from that story, but from Senator Britt's tone, her delivery, also the fact that she was sitting at a kitchen table, something she also defended in that interview with Fox News yesterday, saying that part of the reason she was behind that table and in the kitchen was because Republicans believe in kitchen table issues, although some critics seem to feel that that was kind of an antiquated choice in having her there.
Speaking of kitchen table issues, a lot of concern people have about the economy, but also about the state of the world. Briefly, Nicole, what is the latest on worldwide threats and how Congress is going to keep an eye on everything there?
Well, as you know, Bob, this is a hearing that happens at least once a year here in Congress, and the same intelligence chiefs from ODNI, from the FBI, and other intelligence agencies will be briefing members of the House tomorrow. But some of the top lines out of this hearing are around the issues of Russia and Ukraine. Many of these intelligence chiefs really advocating for the need for additional aid for Ukraine, which continues to be held up in Congress. Also, the threats of China, Iran, and other adversaries around the world have come up during this hearing as well, Bob.
Nicole Killian, thank you very much. Michigan's Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens joins us next to discuss President Biden and his re-election campaign. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. President Joe Biden making campaign stops in several battleground states this week. He will visit Michigan on Thursday, where he's faced some backlash from some progressives over his response to Israel's war with Hamas. Michigan's Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens joins us now, one of them in the delegation. Congresswoman, thanks for being here. We really appreciate your time.
Nice to see you.
It seems like President Biden just keeps going back to Michigan, to your state. Let's talk about the economy first. He has made a real effort to build ties with labor in Michigan. Is it working? Is he being effective in making sure those voters who many times over the years have gone Democratic are staying there?
I really believe in the strategy that President Biden is employing. And we joke in Michigan that he might as well just get a condo in Detroit because he's with us so much and has been very consistently over his entire presidency. From the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, Michigan was his first stop after we passed that. Certainly championing chips and science, key legislation for Michigan. But what he's doing is working, connecting with voters one-on-one. You just don't come in and do big rallies. You see President Biden making stops at diners, going to picket lines, really bringing people in, trying to learn what's on their minds and what issues are facing them, and also giving voters a chance to really get to know the real Joe Biden. And I love it. Our state likes it. And I think it's going to pay dividends come Election Day.
Are you sounding the alarm to White House officials and Biden campaign officials about the support of Arab Americans and others in Michigan who have concerns about the Biden administration's handling of Israel, especially its war with Hamas and Prime Minister Netanyahu? And if you are having those kind of conversations, what are you saying behind the scenes about what needs to be done, if anything?
What I'm saying and how we can look at all of this is that this is a moment for Joe Biden to really succeed as himself and how he chooses to lead, with grace, with dignity, with care and compassion, with listening first. This isn't a rejection campaign from his side at all. People are upset, they're frustrated, they're in deep, deep pain. And Joe Biden cares about these people as people, not just as voters. What's happened in the Middle East is very tragic. You heard him talk very clearly at the State of the Union that he has been a long-standing elected official with the U.S.-Israel relationship and in support of that, but that he also wants to make sure that aid is getting to innocent Palestinians, that we're still pushing for a two-state solution. I thought he gave a great one-on-one interview the other night as well about the complexities of this situation. And this is where the trajectory of Joe Biden's career, steady, consistent, leaderly, shows the stark contrast with a twice impeached, multiple indicted former president that is yet again running for re-election.
You mentioned Trump's legal challenges, his impeachment. You're a member of Congress. You speak to voters all the time. Do you believe that undecided voters, swing voters in Michigan, care about Trump's upcoming criminal hush money payments trial or his potential federal trials looming on the horizon? Are they paying attention? Are they engaged on those issues at all?
I think there are a handful of voters who are concerned, and you've seen this play out throughout the Republican primary process. Certainly, Mr. Trump has been winning Republican primaries handedly. He's now the only person running. His last competitor still hasn't endorsed him. But what you saw, and particularly in a state like Michigan, where Nikki Haley amassed 300,000 votes without even really campaigning there, doing very well in a district like mine. Joe Biden still will win my district and is doing very well in my district, but I represent the suburbs of Detroit. And Donald Trump is not going to be able to come back in and win back these suburban voters. You even see traditional Republican voters, some who are scratching their head and saying the indictments, the prosecution, the way these court cases play out, obviously now bankruptcy, that might push them. But look, that's not the campaign that we really need to focus on. That's in the courts and that will play out. We have to look at record. Joe Biden has delivered for American workers. Joe Biden has delivered for Michigan's economy. I'm enthusiastic about this campaign because, frankly, I think it's going to be so much fun to run on the track record of success and then still push forward the campaign of the future, the things that we want to get done, like banning assault weapons, like working on critical minerals, continuing to bolster our supply chain and our manufacturing base, which is how people earn their living in Michigan.
And finally here, Congresswoman, I've been speaking to some of your fellow House members, House Democrats behind the scenes, and frankly, some of them, they breathed a sigh of relief after the State of the Union because they wanted President Biden to push back against his critics, people who don't think he's as vital as he once was because of his age, and they believed he had an effective night with the State of the Union. Is that your sense of things, that Democrats now, a few days later, feel a little bit more emboldened, encouraged by what happened at the State of the Union, that the president has a bounce in his step? And if so, how do they want him to sustain that? What does that look like? Because in politics, as you know, it's hard to keep up momentum at times as things are fleeting.
Well, we've got a booming economy. People are back to work. We've got a president who's a love leader. And truthfully, I know people get nervous and there's all that going on, but I was fired up for the State of the Union, and my president hit a home run, as I knew he would. I worked on the U.S. auto rescue in President Obama's administration. Joe Biden, as vice president, stood up at the DNC, and what was his famous quote? Osama bin Laden is dead, and GM and Chrysler are alive. He knows how to pack a punch. He knows how to communicate. Capturing moments where lots of people are listening, which he certainly did and delivered on, and made his message clear, not only painting the contrast, but also showing that he's going to stand up for women's rights. He's got a women's health office. That's certainly going to play very well in the suburban district. So let's continue to let Joe Biden be Joe Biden and deliver every step of the way. He's headed toward a good November, in my opinion.
And we hope Congresswoman Haley Stevens comes back soon. And President Biden, of course, welcome anytime here. Thank you very much, Congresswoman. We appreciate it. Tuesday could be the day former President Trump gains enough delegates to get the Republican nomination for president in spirit ahead of the convention. But he'll need some help from the voters in the Georgia primary first. We'll check in on the Peach State. That's coming up next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Tuesday might be the day former President Donald Trump could earn enough delegates to claim the Republican nomination for president. And Georgia is one of 4 states holding primaries on Tuesday. Both Trump and President Biden have recently campaigned in the battleground state, which is poised to play a pivotal role during the general election. CBS News campaign reporters Olivia Rinaldi and Torian Small join us now. Thank you both for being here. Torian, we'll begin with you. You are on the road right now. President Biden, former President Trump, both in Georgia. Such a battleground state. What's the latest?
Yeah, this isn't the first time we've seen dueling campaign events on the same day in the same state. This also happened last month when both went to the border to have competing events there. But what we've seen, though, is really a shift, an unofficial shift, if you will, from the primary to the general election. Biden has been focusing his efforts on rebuilding that crucial coalition that helped him make it across the finish line in 2020. Crucial battlegrounds like Georgia was part of that. Fewer than 12 100,000 voters helped him not just win the state, but ultimately the presidency. But that's his biggest challenge this time around, because he's not only facing opposition and inspiring those same voters to come out this time around, he's also looking at a protest vote movement happening on the ballot as well. We've seen it happen in Michigan, where about 100,000 voters there voted uncommitted. And then also in states, unsuspecting states like North Carolina, 80,000 voters there. I talked to folks out here who say they're looking for something similar, but around that 12,000 mark to really scare Biden into compromising his position on the Israel-Hamas conflict. Last thing I want to point out is on re-inspiring these folks. I talked to many Biden surrogates who say, while the president has done a lot policy-wise for people who are most impacted here in Georgia, that base, the Biden administration has done a bad job at messaging. Take a listen to what Atlanta Mayor Dickens had to say when I talked to him this weekend.
They haven't done a good job of marketing the successes of this administration. They have to go talk straight to the voters, talk straight to the people about the things that they've benefited from. We've got folks taking credit for stuff that they've instrumented, and so we have to show the facts. And so that's what Joe and Kamala are going across the country doing over the next month and carrying it all the way to Election Day.
That sentiment was echoed by supporters at the Biden event I attended and grassroots organizers who were doing some heavy lifting for the Biden campaign. They were out door knocking. Their plan is to get to 5 million households to get them to join into or vote in this election come November.
Thanks for that report, Tori. And stay with us. Olivia Rinaldi here at the table. You've been on the road in recent days covering Georgia, covering former President Trump. We just heard about how the Biden surrogates see a lot of this. Well, what about some of the voters? Georgia, in particular, is a complicated state, traditionally Republican in recent decades, but now has 2 Democratic senators. What's the Trump campaign doing to try to win back some of those voters who maybe went Democratic in the last 4 or 5 years? And what are voters telling you?
Yeah, Bob, it's an excellent question. I mean, I was there over the weekend. Trump was holding a rally at the same time Biden was. Trump was in a very ruby red district, though. He was in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district, really speaking to his base and invigorating them. But he also, during his speech, spoke to Black voters, Hispanic voters, and union voters, and said to them, I have done more for you as president than Biden has. And in fact said to Black voters, I have done more for you than Abraham Lincoln has. I mean, that's an astounding claim to make, but then he was talking about the jobs that he's created. But that message is actually resonating with some voters. I spoke to Jeremiah Hicks. He's a Black voter in Georgia. He's a union worker, and he voted for Trump twice, 2016 and 2020. Take a listen to what he told me about why he's supporting Trump over Biden.
A lot of people, especially melanated Black people, see the difference now. They try to paint him as a racist, but we can see through the BS now, you know what I'm saying? Like, he's a good guy because he's not really doing anything for us. He's more misleading. And Trump is straightforward. He's gonna tell you how he feels, whether you gotta like it or not, you know what I'm saying? If you don't like it, man up, change what you're doing, you know? And other than that, you know, Biden, he pretty much pacifies you and tell you it's gonna be all right, but it's never all right.
Now, that's just one voter, but it's reflective of this broader sentiment among Black Americans. That's the coalition that Biden desperately needs to hold together to re-win in November. But that's starting to chip away a little bit. Trump is chipping away at that. We're starting to see some of those voters go over to his base. It's something very interesting we're watching.
We'll keep watching all of this. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but we hope you both come back soon to America Decides. Olivia Rinaldi and Torian Small, 2 terrific reporters. Thank you very much. And that does it for us today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.